There are a number of independent researchers out there who are doing a great job at unveiling things about humanity's distant past that are not in textbooks and not in the mainstream media. One of them is Andrew Collins. He's been digging into mysteries of the past for decades, and lately he has done extensive research on Göbekli Tepe, the ancient megalithic site in Turkey that has upended much of what standard archaeology has told us, simply because it is known to be much older than what was believed to be possible for such advanced structures. I hope you like this clip.
But, I mean, the thing that got me when I first looked at Göbekli Tepe, and I looked at all the carvings, and having already written extensively about Sumerian civilization, Egyptian civilization, was just how alien, and I don't mean from the stars, but I mean just how alien the carvings looked, and so out of place to Southwest Asia. I mean, they looked like nothing that came after them. And if I had to,
and it's what's the time frame here? It's the carbon-14 dating has dated this site.
Yeah, I mean, basically the site was occupied and used between 9,500 BC and 8,000 BC. So that's a period of around 1,500 years. And, it was in full operation. I mean, but what's so interesting is that these huge stone enclosures, which, you could compare, let's say, with Stonehenge, although Stonehenge with beautiful carvings and these T-shaped capitals, is that the most sophisticated, the largest and most sophisticated of the enclosures are the oldest ones. And as the years went by, these enclosures got smaller and smaller and less sophisticated, until eventually they went from being, let's say 30 meters across down to about 3 meters across. Mm-hmm. And they look like, the size of your bathroom or something. I mean, it's bizarre the way that everything changed, but you would expect the sophistication to be going in the opposite direction, that you would get the simplest enclosures to start with, and the sophistication would come afterwards. But that's not the case at Göbekli Tepe.
It seems as if people were forgetting the knowledge.
They were forgetting, but also they were getting to the point where they didn't need to do what they were doing anymore. And you might say, well, why would that be? Well, the answer is clear, that the people that created Göbekli Tepe still had a very strong memory of this cataclysm, which is now pretty well established to have occurred initially around 10,800 BC, and to involve a fragmentation of a comet that came into the atmosphere and peppered the northern hemisphere, creating huge devastation, possibly destroying up to 75% of the population in North America alone, but also reaching very close to Göbekli Tepe itself. There is a site on the Euphrates called Abu Horoya. It's in modern-day Syria, although today it's beneath the waters of a dam, a reservoir of a dam. And the archaeologists there discovered not only artifacts going back 11 to 12,000 years and more, but they also found a layer of melted glass and other types of what they call scoric debris, which could only have been created by something of extreme high temperature. And we're talking, 2,500 degrees centigrade. Mm. Now, the only thing that can cause this on Earth is lightning. But if it's lightning, it's a very small area, but this was over an extensive area, and strongly has suggested to climatologists, to geologists, and many other types of disciplines that we are dealing with some kind of, obviously a comet impact, but some kind of airborne blast of fire which is quite characteristic of what would happen with an incoming fragment of a comet. And this was found all over the Northern Hemisphere. Also, there is a layer of thick black ash that's been found in various continents around the world that all dates to about 10,800 BC.
Yeah.
In Europe, it's called the Usilu Horizon. In America, it's called the Black Mat. And it contains cosmic debris of catastrophe. And it's very similar around the world. And it tells us that this catastrophe almost certainly did occur.
And the fact that it's the reason it's black is because there were large fires all across the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah, but it's not simply the fires at the location. It's about the fires creating ash and debris that rises up into the air and remains in the lower atmosphere until, of course, clouds form, and then it falls back down with rain generally, which would be very toxic, very acid-like rain that would then not just create this layer, but also stain very heavily the soil around it, which is exactly what's been found. I mean, I've viewed this layer in where was it? Belgium, just over the border from Holland, with the discoverer a few years ago, and it is bizarre because I saw it within these sandy layers, layers which had been laid down at the end of the last ice age, and if you pick it out, it's almost like exactly the same as what you would get if you looked beneath a bonfire in your back garden. It's that same oily blackness. It's very strange to feel that and to know that it's around 12,800 years old, and yet it's still exactly the same as it was then. And that brings to life just how terrible this event must have been across the Northern Hemisphere. But
it is established that the climate changed during this time, isn't it?
Yes, it has. I mean, you've only got to look at the ice cores in the Arctic and Antarctic to be able to see, big changes in the chemicals going on at this time, which tells us that there were huge conflagrations going on in the world. A lot of fires, basically. Now, the skeptics would say, well, these are just regional fires that were going on here and there, or at best maybe some volcanoes that were going up at the time. But I'm afraid to say that the evidence of the glass, the melted glass, for instance, which is everywhere. I mean, it's all over the different continents. Would tend to suggest that we are dealing with something that totally devastated the Northern Hemisphere. And so these people at Göbekli Tepe, they come out of this, and immediately this mini ice age, which was almost certainly triggered by this event and lasted 1,200 years. So that brings us to 9,600 BC. That's when Göbekli Tepe was built. So it was built directly after the end of this mini ice age. And here you have people creating these incredible Stonehenge-like monuments at this time. And you have to ask yourself, what was going on here? Well, firstly, I identify in the book that you've read, Göbekli Tepe, Genesis of the Gods, the fact that there is very clear comet imagery on various of the stones, particularly the most important
that's stones, very salient when you
biggest
write
and most important ones. And this alerted me to the fact that the people that were here very clearly were trying to appease or stop any further cataclysms taking place. And to do this, they were employing the services of shamans. And these shamans would enter into what we'd call a death trance, in other words, a very heavy altered state of consciousness, and believe that they were being projected, through certain stones within these monuments towards the sky world. In other words, somewhere that was accessed via the Milky Way, via the stars. And here they would encounter the supernatural creatures that were thought to bring about these cataclysms. Now, what type of supernatural creatures? Well, we're talking about essentially canines, essentially large canines, dogs, wolves, and foxes. And obviously in North America, for instance, it would be coyotes, for instance. Mm-hmm. And all of these are what's known as tricksters. And these tricksters are what can bring about catastrophe. They can bring about the end of the world. They can bring about the end of time. And they have to be appeased. They have to be made offerings. And when a comet appears in a sky, and strangely enough, in some traditions, this even continues to this day, it is seen as the tail of one of these canines. And that these tails of the comet are the tails of these supernatural creatures that enter into our space and have to be dealt with. And I mean, I put an account in the book from the Maya lands of Mexico from the 17th century of a village where a comet appeared in the sky, which was almost certainly Halley's comet, by the way. And the priests came out dressed in animal robes and garbs, particularly with the tails of foxes. And these quite clearly were the animistic forms that were associated with the intelligence that was connected with these supernatural beings that were thought to bring about catastrophe. That by doing rituals, that by making offerings, they could stave off the end of the world until the next time. And I think that these ideas have been going on ever since the end of the last ice age in different parts of the world. And I think that the reason why the most sophisticated enclosures were constructed at the beginning is because this is when there was the most urgency about dealing with this problem. And this is why you have the comet symbols and imagery on the stones. And this gradually disappears across the centuries until right at the end of Göbekli Tepe. As I say, they were only creating these tiny enclosures that were very simple. Yes, they were still doing the T-shaped pillars, but they were tiny now. I mean, they were now no more than around 2 meters in height. So
people felt that they had been able to appease.
They'd done it, creatures. Yeah. But the thing is that the world was changing because about 8,500 BC, there was the introduction of agriculture and animal husbandry and a lot of other changes in technology that were beginning to occur. So that the interests began to turn away from dealing with things in the sky world to ensuring that the sun appeared each day, and obviously at the time of the winter solstice, for instance, that it would start, the days would start growing longer, and et cetera, because this now became more important to them because of their settled lifestyle. It was now important to them to basically revere and venerate the sun. I mean, literally. And for this reason, we see the changes in the orientation of the enclosures at Göbekli Tepe suddenly changing from what are quite clearly picking out certain stars to picking out where the sun either rises or sets on the horizon at the time of the solstices and the equinoxes. And I think that's really important to stress that, that the emphasis of the orientation of these enclosures suddenly changed. And this reflects what was going on in the world at the time, and that's what we call the Neolithic Revolution and the beginning of agriculture. That's just one. I mean, there almost certainly were other cataclysms that occurred possibly around 30, 40,000 years ago, possibly much earlier. I mean, I don't want to speculate on specific dates because I've not gone into them in huge detail. But clearly this wouldn't have been something on its own. I mean, there would have been other cataclysms, not necessarily to do with a comet. I mean, maybe to do with supernovas, obviously, stratovolcanoes going up. Obviously you got the Toba event, which which took place in, where was Toba? I can't remember now. In Eastern Asia, was it? That affects large parts of Central and Eastern Asia about, 70,000 years ago, I think, the Toba event, and possibly created a bottleneck in human advancement where we went down to just a few thousand people. I mean, that's what some of the theories suggest. Yeah. And that wasn't a cosmic event. That was simply a volcano blowing up, basically. So there's got to be a number of these cataclysms. And I mean, going back to what Plato says just before he really introduces the whole story of Atlantis, which, by the way, I don't dismiss. I mean, I've written a whole book called Gateway to Atlantis that looks at every single one of the theories and eventually pins down the most probable location as the area of the Caribbean and the Bahamas, obviously in the western Atlantic basin.
That's also where Graham Hancock have been diving to look for.
Yes, he has. Yeah, I mean, but obviously Graham has, a number of different views about Atlantis. I mean, in his books, he has tended to place it in different locations. But most importantly is that he has dived onto these sites all around the world. He did a book called Underworld, which looked at all these remains underwater everywhere. And I think that that's really important to say that, look, it's not just Atlantis. We're not just dealing with one location somewhere. There is evidence of lost civilizations off the coasts of many different continents. And that we need to factor that into our understanding of the origins of civilization.
Yeah, I guess anything is possible. Why are we told in school that all these myths and legends and descriptions of mystical events are just fantasies?
Because history books are supposed to be like the be-all or end-all of what happened in the past. But as we know, most history books are only written by the victors, and do not necessarily give us a good assessment of what happened in the past. But the thing about myths and legends is that they're colloquial. They are carried forward by individuals that will have retained that knowledge across countless generations. I mean, I still find it beneficial today to go to a location, whether it be in Turkey, in Egypt or Indonesia. I was doing it recently, and just say to the village elders, what do you know about this place? What was handed down to you about what was going on? And often they will tell you the most incredible things, and you think, why isn't this in any books? The academic will come along and say, oh, this is just local rubbish that's been made up to account for why it's there. Some of it may be, but within it are cores of information that actually make a lot of sense if you check them out. To me, that's very, very important, and is missed by the academics and scholars who will ignore these local people, will ignore the indigenous peoples and just excavate a site, come up to their own conclusions and disappear, and that's the end of it. They won't even interact with the locals. And that I think is wrong.
It's unscientifical, actually.
Well, they would say the opposite, that it's unscientific to listen to folklore and legends. But I think that that's silly. And I'll give you one example. And I haven't got the full facts here, but just take my word for this. There is a crater in Australia that was unquestionably the result of a cosmic event. Let's say an asteroid or comet fragment, and I think it dates about 15,000 years ago. And when the local original peoples were asked about this, originally they said fire came out of the sky and hit the ground and created that. Now, this event took place, let's say, 15,000 years ago. To me, that is a local memory of an event that's been carried forward. And I mean, clearly they didn't just say it that easy. I mean, they had a whole story surrounding, who did it and why. But the core of that information has been preserved across 15,000 years. Yeah. And similar cores of information can be found in folklore, myths and legends all the way around the world. And as you say, I've used it in various of my books, and I'm proud of it. I'm happy to do that. I think that it's very important to listen to what local people have got to say about the sites. If we didn't do that, for instance, Heinrich Schliemann would never have found Troy.
If you want to see the whole interview, click on the link at the end of this video, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't done that already.